Hey everyone, my name is Forrest and I'm a fourth year medical student located outside of Detroit, Michigan. And today I wanted to talk about the importance of student-led research. Whether you're in college applying to medical school or in medical school trying to get into a competitive residency, research can do nothing but help you on your application. And really, it's the key differentiator in many fields to becoming a competitive applicant. But one of the major issues that I always see is people don't know where to even begin or don't really even understand the basics of research. So the goal of this video is to give you an overview of that process and teach you things I wish I had known at your stage. Just to get things started, I have no disclosures. As I said earlier, I am a fourth year medical student located at Oakland University William Beaumont School of Medicine. But to be clear, that all these opinions are my own and I am not a representative of my institution. So you might be wondering, who am I and why should you listen to me? And that's a great question. Before entering into medical school, I trained at the NIH, and during the first and second year of school, I went back for a summer research internship. Since that time, I was able to accrue 71 publications in peer-reviewed journals, including JAMA Surgery, JAMA Ophthalmology, Academic Medicine, Health Affairs, Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, the Journal of Graduate Medical Education, and the Journal of Surgical Education. I was also able to get 16 abstracts accepted for publication and was able to personally present 5 podium and 9 poster presentations. On top of that, I recently won Best Poster at Plastic Surgery The Meeting for having the best abstract within that category. I tell you all this not to brag or try to tout my accomplishments, but to let you know that this is something that's possible as a medical student if you have the right guidance. Many people might look at my numbers and say, oh, a lot of this is probably from training at the NIH, but to be completely transparent, I only had 3 publications coming into medical school that was from the NIH, and the rest of this was done as a student. So, should you be doing research? I think the answer is overwhelmingly yes. If you have any preference in the match, whether you're trying to get into a competitive specialty or you want to go to a specific location after your training of medical school, then yes, you should absolutely be doing research. Why? Well, the obvious is it makes you more competitive just by having a publication on your CV. Even in specialties or programs where the program director will tell you that they really don't value research, I just simply don't think that that's true. And I don't think that those programs are being completely honest with you because you have to understand their incentive structure. Within academic medicine, which is what you're applying to when you're going into a residency program, the primary currency of many of these program directors is publications and scholarly output when it comes to getting recognized by their department and getting promotions. They're judged off of this, so they're naturally incentivized to bring in residents that have some level of background of getting published. That's something that I really think you need to keep in mind when you're building your competitive application for residency. The next thing that it helps with is getting letters of recommendation from very important people within your field. Again, academics in medicine, primary currency is research. They look for publications. If you can come up with your own idea and bring it to them as a publish-ready product, they're going to be a lot more likely to recognize you and give you the time of day when these people have incredibly busy schedules. And once you prove that you can be an asset to them, they'll eventually repay that favor that you've given them with a great letter of recommendation. The next thing is interview material. I can't tell you how many people have asked me about my research within interviews, and it makes you a more interesting person to talk to, and it can create points of connection that you thought you might not have with your interviewer. The other thing is you're develop your ability to critically analyze papers within your field that are guiding policy and guidelines. I like to say you need to stop being an idiot within your field. I can't tell you how many attending physicians there are out there that understand certain guidelines, but they can't tell you why the guidelines are in place. They don't understand the studies and the flaws behind those studies that got them to that point to where they say, hey, this is why we should do that. And if you really want to be the best type of physician that you can be, you need to be able to read and interpret research studies to understand, is this something that really applies to your day-to-day practice, or is this something that there's a significant flaw where potentially you should be discounting this work? If you don't know how to read and write research, you're not going to be able to do that. The other thing is there's many benefits beyond research that indirectly make you more competitive. You're more likely to get alpha, omega, alpha status. You're more likely to get school awards and scholarships. All this can also be listed on your residency application, which makes you a more competitive applicant. And publications follow you for the rest of your life. This is why I think people in college should be getting involved in research now, because if you get a publication while you're in college, you can list that both on your medical student application, but also on your residency application. They follow you for the rest of your life and can be a lifelong benefit. Whereas something like volunteering in college doesn't always translate to the residency stage when you're applying. So really getting involved early in publishing will help you build out that CV. And there's other unforeseen opportunities that are just hard to quantify or really anticipate. But when you're getting involved in research, you're exposing yourself to leaders in the field. Things come up that you could have never imagined. An example of that is we're starting a volunteer cooperative that would have never happened with research. And there's a long story behind that, but just don't underestimate the power of getting involved in research in the first place. So now that we've established that you should definitely be getting involved in research, the next question is, when should I start? And the answer is today. Preferably yesterday, you should have started. The reason I say this is because getting published takes time, and a lot of students really do not recognize how long it takes. The first thing is to realize that you really only have 3 years in medical school to publish. Your 4th year of medical school, your application for residency is due at the very beginning, and you can't list your publications on that after the fact. So you have 3 years, not 4, to publish, unless you take a research year. And to give you an average time frame of how long it takes to write a full-length paper, it takes around 1 to 4 months in terms of data collection, getting an IRB approved, developing your methodologies, actually writing the paper. And then once you actually get it submitted, it takes up to 6 months or longer to even get it accepted and then published in that journal. The peer review process takes a long time, and you can only submit to one journal at a time. So you have to wait for one journal to review it and then hopefully accept it. But if they don't, then they reject it. And each journal can take around 2 to 3 months to give you a decision based off your paper. So you can see after 2 or 3 submissions to journals, you're looking at over 6 to 9 months just to get published. These are all things you need to take into account when you're trying to figure out how long do I have to really publish and get this on my CV and on my residency application. And one of the things I want to end with on this slide is some famous last words that I feel like I've heard a lot of classmates say, and that's, I'll have time to publish 3rd year once I'm exposed to clinical research. People wait during their first 2 years to not get involved in research because you're largely exposed to preclinical mentors and not physicians who are involved in clinical research. Do not do this. Your 3rd year of medical school is easily your busiest. And if you didn't have time to publish research in your first 2 years, you certainly will not have time to publish in your 3rd year. It is possible to publish in your 3rd year of medical school, but only if you build the habits from the first 2 years to really understand the research process. So get started early and stay consistent with it. So before going any further, I want to talk about the term research pollution, which you're likely to hear a lot of over the course of medical school. And I think Dr. Douglas Altman in 1994 really alluded to this term. And he has a great quote that I want to read for y'all. As the system encourages poor research, it is the system that should be changed. We need less research, better research, and research done for the right reasons. Abandoning using the number of publications as a measure of ability would be a start. And to reemphasize, he had this statement back in 1994. This is an ideal vision of what research should be, and I completely agree with this vision. But unfortunately, over the last 30 years, this has not changed. The incentive structure has stayed the same, where unfortunately for both academics who are physicians and medical students, using the number of publications as a measure of your academic ability is the predominant strategy. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge Dr. Altman's vision, and I think that that's something that we should try to get back to. But my goal for you is to make you the most competitive applicant possible. So what we're going to talk about today is how to work within this current system that we have, which is increasing the amount of academic productivity you can have over the course of medical school. So with that being said, we come to our first slide on strategy. And that strategy tries to answer the question of, do I pursue a quantity versus quality approach to research? And the dominant strategy among most medical schools is to take a quantity centered approach, having the most publications possible to stand out. And this is largely to overcome filters that are placed to screen out applicants without enough research for different fields. And that can vary by program and by specialty. But if you don't meet the publication filters that some of these programs are putting in place nowadays without step one scores, then your application isn't even going to make it to the desk. So I would say that having a certain degree of quantity is incredibly important and probably should be the first thing you think of. The problem is it's created this research arms race where year after year we see more and more publications and research items coming out of applicants. We'll get to a slide in a second that really demonstrates that. The other thing I want to mention is do not neglect the quality aspect of your research though. You should have at least a few publications where you're first author and they're highly impactful publications. Things that are meaningful to you that you can talk about in an interview, because this is really where you're going to get grilled in the interview process on your agency and the stuff that you really did to get this project from start to finish. Because they really want to be able to know, are you able to take a project, answer a question from start to finish, or are you just somebody who's trying to drive up their numbers? And if they get any sense that you're just trying to drive up your numbers in terms of how much research you have and that you're not genuinely interested in research, then they're going to be a lot less interested in you as a candidate. So I've used the term research item a few times now, and you might be asking yourself, what is that? And I can agree it's confusing if you've never heard of it. But basically what it is it's a combination of abstracts, presentations that can be poster or oral presentations, or a publication, which is just a paper in a peer-reviewed journal. And this can be confusing though, because a lot of people report back things that aren't exactly factually true, like plastic surgery requires 35 publications in the last match. That's simply just not true at all. What they're really reporting is the number of research items that they matched with, and that's a combination of abstracts, presentations, and publications. Unfortunately for us, residency programs only report back this combined measure, and they don't actually tell us the individual amount of abstracts, amount of presentations, and publications. We just get this big lump aggregate measure and have to make inferences based off of that. But how do you really calculate how many research items you have? We can use my CV as an example. So I have 16 abstracts. I have 14 presentations combined with poster and oral presentations. And then I have 71 publications, which brings us to 101 research items. And that's how you hear about these people having these insane numbers of quote unquote publications, but in reality, they're just research items, which is a combination of abstract, presentation, and publication. So here I wanted to show you exactly what this looks like. And this is a graph from a paper that I actually wrote a while back on the number of research items, again, not publications alone, for plastic surgery applicants. And as you'll see here, there's been what we described earlier as a research arms race. You'll see that in 2020, the number of applicants matching into plastic surgery had 19.1 research items, and the number of unmatched had 11.6. Fast forward 4 years later, that's just the course of one medical student's career, basically. That number has doubled for unmatched applicants. Unmatched applicants now have 26.3 research items, and those that did match had on average 34.7 research items. So we see now that those who go unmatched have more research items now than they had for matched applicants just 20 years ago. So this is what people are referring to when they talk about a research arms race, where it's just this year over year increase in the number of research items and scholarly output that applicants are having to produce to even stay competitive. And I hope that this kind of really emphasizes the importance for you to get involved in research and the importance to get involved as soon as possible. And I apologize for continuing to use plastic surgery references in my examples, but much of my research has been focused around plastic surgery, and it's my current interest in terms of my residency application. But I wanted to use this as an example to give you a better idea of exactly how many publications are needed for these surgical subspecialties to match. So what we have here is a table from a paper I wrote where we went out to find exactly how many publications are necessary, because we know that the number of research items to match is around 35 for matched applicants in plastics, but the total number of publications needed is right around 8 in the most recent class. The number of first author publications is around 2.5, and then the number of second author publications is right around 2. So what these two numbers here tell you is that applicants are really getting involved in a high impact, high authorship involvement, which means these are high quality contributions. But then it also shows up here that they have nearly 8 publications on average, which means that they're also engaging in that quantity strategy too, to really have as many publications as they're able to get. One other graph I wanted to show you here that I really think exemplifies what we mentioned earlier is how program directors are most likely using screening metrics to weed out people that don't have certain scholarly contributions on their CV. I want to draw your attention here. This is over the last 3 matched plastic surgery classes. We'll see that around 17% here matched without any publications. That number dropped to around 15%. And then the most recently matched class had less than 10% of people matching without any publications. Now let's look over here. The number of people matching without any first author publications dropped down to under 30% when it was nearly 40% the year before. And then the number of people matching without any publications that are specifically related to plastic surgery in that field has dropped significantly over time. You'll see around half of people 3 years ago were matching into plastic surgery without any plastics pubs. And then that's dropped to 42%, and now it's down to 34%. So nearly 2/3 of all people matching into plastic surgery have some sort of plastic surgery publication, when that wasn't the case 2 years ago. So now that we have a better understanding of the numbers really associated with these competitive surgical subspecialties and even competitive specialties that aren't related to surgery like dermatology, I think it's important for us to really understand what each component of a research item is. So let's start with an abstract, and let's start what it's not, because this is a point of confusion here, because abstract can have multiple meanings. And the thing that a lot of people think of when they hear the term abstract is this right here. It's the summary of a research paper. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the beginning of a research paper. We're talking about something completely different. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a very short summary of a research project that you've completed or that you've almost completed that you want to present at a national conference. And the structure of it actually looks a lot like the beginning of a research paper, but you haven't written the paper yet. And usually the rule is for most of these conferences that you present at is that you can't have already submitted the paper for publication, and it can't be in a journal already. And to be very clear here, accepted abstracts that you submit to a conference lead to a presentation if you're the primary author on that abstract. And the other aspect that is somewhat debated among people in medical education is whether or not the abstract itself needs to be published online to be able to list it on your CV. I'm of the opinion that it really should be listed somewhere online where the abstract can be found. It's cataloged somewhere and you can point back to it in your CV. There's some conferences that do not publish their abstracts, and typically that's something that you can't list on your CV. But many conferences, especially national conferences, do end up putting their abstract in some sort of journal or online additional content that is basically a catalog of everything that was presented at the conference itself. So what do these abstracts look like when they're published online somewhere? Well, let me show you. They can look like a couple different things. This is one of my first abstracts I got accepted, and this isn't in any journal, but it is listed on the conference's webpage. That's a bit buried, but if you search enough, you can find this online somewhere. And you'll see it looks very much like the beginning of a research paper, the summary of that paper. But instead, this is a freestanding abstract that led to a presentation. Here's another one that was presented at ACP, which is one of the largest internal medicine conferences. This is a little bit easier to find online, but again, it's not in any sort of journal. This is where we get into conferences that do present or they do publish their abstracts in journals as a supplemental material section. We'll see here that this is another one where this is a well-known plastic surgery journal, and as like a supplemental content, they'll publish all the abstracts that were presented at this particular conference out of an agreement that they have with that conference. So now let's talk about presentations, the second type of research item. And again, in order to get to this stage, you have to have submitted an abstract to a conference that was then deemed worthy of presentation and accepted to that conference. And there's two main types of presentations. There's poster presentations and oral or podium presentations, where you get up and speak in front of a large audience. And then there's different types of conferences that you can present at. Schools typically have research days that I'm sure you'll see emails for all the time, depending on which school you go to. There's also regional conferences for societal memberships within different specialties. And there's also national conferences. This tends to be the gold standard in terms of legitimacy and prestige among different academics. And then we have international conferences. And again, we'll talk about these in a little bit further detail. So first we have poster presentations. And out of the two different types of presentations, this tends to be the least prestigious or recognized way to present your work. But for medical students, they're perfectly acceptable and often expected of those applying to residency. If you can't present a poster, you often can't present a podium presentation. So this is your first step. If you've never presented at a conference, I would recommend trying for a poster presentation first. The other thing I wanted to say is that if you see any advertisements for an e-poster where you can submit an abstract, but you don't actually go to the conference and have any sort of formal presentation session, I would argue that these are almost worthless on a residency application. The whole purpose of presenting your work on a poster or a podium presentation is to get involved with the scientific process of communicating your results and having people question your methodologies. But that simply can't be done with an e-poster. So if you see this, I would recommend steering clear from this. It tends to be more that research pollution junk aspect on your application that program directors aren't going to be really impressed by. But I also want to talk about the different types of conferences and the implications of each of those that you present at. The first one is your school conference. These typically tend to be very easy to get into. The bar to entry are typically very low, and I don't know if I've ever seen any of my classmates not get into a school level conference. I think there are some schools that have more prestigious poster presentations like Harvard, some of the Ivy Leagues that is open to more than just the people at the medical school. But in general, these are a good way to cut your teeth, get your first chance at really learning the communication process, but it's not going to have a lot of value on your CV. One of the other advantages that it can have, though, is there's a high chance of getting some level of school level award or recognition. And if you can get this, it's something else that you can add on your CV as under the awards section, and it does add a lot of value to your residency application. The next is regional conferences. These tend to be of average value. They're not as difficult to get into as a national conference, but there's still some pretty significant bars you have to get over in terms of the quality of your project compared to school presentations. But one of the greatest advantages at these conferences is they're smaller and they tend to have a lot of local leaders within the field that you're applying to. And this should be viewed as one of the best ways to find potential new mentors, because these people are geographically close to you, and mentorship can be done online and it can be done through a virtual connection, but having someone that's close to you is going to be a lot easier to maintain that relationship, and that can really result in stronger letters of recommendation down the road when you're applying for residency. And again, as we mentioned earlier, national conferences tend to be the gold standard when it comes to presentations. They're highly competitive and they're usually difficult to get into, but also difficult to stand out at. Your odds of winning an award at one of these conferences is significantly harder. One, because of the quality of people presenting, but then also just the number of people also presenting at these conferences. But the advantage is you have real legitimacy on your CV to say that you got into one of these national conferences, because they're typically tied to specialty groups that tend to infer a degree of prestige and legitimacy to anything that you present there. Now we get to international conferences. These tend to be highly variable in terms of their how legitimate they are and how competitive they are. There's some that are just as hard to get into as national conferences, if not more, but there's also a lot of junk ones out there where they're just trying to get you to pay for the conference fees, come and travel there, and it's really kind of a scam. So I would be very cautious when submitting to international conferences. Next, we have oral or podium presentations. They tend to be called either one. They're the same thing, but these are very prestigious achievements to have on your CV. They're often recognized as something at the resident level. Most residents are expected to complete oral or podium presentations, whereas posters tend to be reserved for medical students. So if you're a medical student applying to residency and you have one of these on your CV already, it really shows that you're operating at the resident level when it comes to disseminating your scholarly work, which is a huge plus. What is this exactly? It's typically a slideshow walkthrough on stage in front of a large audience. You've got a PowerPoint and you're basically giving almost like a TED Talk style presentation of your work. Typically, there's a round of questions that are asked afterwards. These can be benign questions, but I've also heard horror stories where this is where people get grilled and asked ridiculously hard questions in front of a crowd of people. And it can be a little intimidating, but it's part of the scientific process. And if you can navigate that, then and realize that you are the only one who knows your research better than anyone else, then you'll be okay. But to be clear, this is not a digital poster. And this is where things can get a little bit confusing. E-poster, like we mentioned last time, is something that you typically don't show up to and present. They're just kind of displayed randomly throughout the conference at all times, and there's not any formal presentation session where you're presenting that work. A digital poster, on the other hand, tends to be a poster presentation that's given on a PowerPoint slide, but it's only one slide. You're not clicking through a PowerPoint and giving the oral talk, and it might even look like a podium where you're standing in front of a crowd of people, but by the strictest definition, I would classify this as a poster presentation. And trying to say that it's a podium presentation, if really scrutinized by a program director, they're going to look at that and say, this guy is gaming the system. And they're going to then view the rest of your achievements on your CV and your residency application through that lens. So I would really caution you not to try to oversell any of your digital posters or any of your presentations for that matter. So now that we've gone through what an abstract is and what a presentation is and how they count towards being considered a research item, I wanted to go through a couple scenarios to give you an idea of what is and is not a research item when you get to your CV or your residency application. So you submit an abstract that gets accepted and published online, and you end up presenting the poster for that accepted abstract. How many research items do you have in this scenario? Well, now you have two. You have a presentation and you have an abstract. Scenario 2, you submit an abstract that gets accepted and is not published online, but you do get to present the poster. So in this scenario, you only have one research item, which is a presentation. Because your abstract was not published online, I would not recommend listing this on your CV or your residency application as a research item. Scenario 3, your friend submits an abstract that you worked on and you're on the authorship for that abstract, and it ends up getting accepted and published online, but he or she presents the poster. So in this scenario, how many research items do you have? Well, in this one, you would only have one. And what would that one be? It would be the abstract. You're listed as an author on that abstract, so you can claim credit for that research item, and it's published online. But you didn't actually present the poster, so you didn't participate in the poster, so that's not a research item you can claim. And finally, scenario 4. Your friend submits an abstract that you worked on, and it gets accepted, but it's not published online, and he or she presents a poster. How many research items do you have in this scenario? Well, in this scenario, you unfortunately only have 0 because the abstract itself was not published online, so it's not listable, and the presentation was not given by you, but rather your friend. So from these 2 items, there's nothing you can really list here. Now let's talk about publications. This is the third and final research item that you can have on your CV or residency application. And what is it? It's a paper in a peer-reviewed journal, a scientific journal. It's not a newspaper article. It's not a magazine article. It's not something that you wrote for Doximity that's published online somewhere. This has to be a peer-reviewed journal. And it's the natural endpoint of any research project. But to be very clear, it's also the highest value research item out of all 3. It's better than any presentation or abstract that you could list on your CV. And the other thing is that journal name also matters pretty significantly when listing these on your CV or residency application. In general, you want a journal that's PubMed indexed. And what does that mean? It just means that the journal is, or that at least the articles within the journal are searchable on PubMed. And you might not even know what PubMed is, but that's basically just a giant Google-styled government database where you can search articles, and if they come up, you can read either the abstract or the entire article online. But if the article does not show up at all on PubMed, then it typically means that the journal itself is not PubMed indexed, which should be somewhat of a red flag in terms of the quality of the journal. And if it's not PubMed indexed, I wouldn't submit to that journal. I would also caution you from submitting to any predatory journals. This is going to require a video in and of itself to help you understand how to recognize these journals. But for now, I'll just tell you, if you ever get emails about submitting to a journal as a beginner in research and kind of feels scammy, you notice that the email itself, the formatting is off, these tend to be major red flags that this is a predatory journal. They often solicit money to submit to the journal or to publish in the journal. Stay as far away from these journals as possible. The one other thing I want to talk about is that there's different types of publications. I originally just thought that there was original research articles, and that's what most people think of when they think of research. They think of around a 5-page paper where you start with a research question, you have an introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion. That's what a research article is, and that tends to be the highest form of a publication that you can have. But it's not the only one that you can have. It's where you're generating new data that's never been discovered before. But there's also something called systematic reviews and meta-analyses. I'll make another video on the different types of publications too, but just know that this is a list of all the different types of publications that you can have and list on your residency application. So here we kind of break down what these publications look like for plastic surgery applicants who matched. This isn't a clear breakdown of original research articles, but you'll see here just there's a lot of different types of articles that are published. But anything that says clinical research or bench research or medical education, those are all original research articles that were published. So you'll see that the vast majority of people who match are publishing original full-length articles. But systematic reviews, meta-analyses take up around a quarter of all publications of matched applicants. So those also should not be discounted. So moving away from research items, I just want to talk about a few general strategies that I think are keys to success when getting started in research. One is pursue research projects that can be presented. With stuff like meta-analyses or review articles, they tend not to be easily presented. But if you're doing something that is a primary original research article where you're generating new data, this tends to be the best type of project that gets presented at research conferences. And the reason I tell you this is the best way to increase the number of research items you have, because in that scenario, if you are first author on both the abstract and the paper, you can then list 3 items. You have presented the work, you've had an abstract accepted, and you have the paper that's also been published. My next key to success would be to achieve both the high quantity and high quality of publications. Again, you want to get past those screening metrics for entry into the specialty to even get your application reviewed. But once you get past that screening metric, you want to have quality that the program director is going to see when they actually do look at your application. The other thing I'll recommend is pursue projects that can result in multiple publications. This can be a bit hard to predict or gauge in the beginning stages, but for an example, if you build out a database of different data that you can then analyze in different ways, you can get different papers and projects off that single database. And when you do that, you're really being as efficient as possible with the time you put into doing the research versus the number of publications that you can get off that research. The next is you're going to have a mentor. Find a mentor with a proven track record. And what do I mean by that? Someone that other students say, this is a great person to work with. But another key to success is look up your mentor's name in PubMed before agreeing to work with them. If you notice that they really have not published that many papers in PubMed in the last 3 to 4 years, I would strongly recommend avoiding that mentor, not because it means they're a bad person or would be a bad mentor, but it means that their primary focus is not always about getting published. There's a lot of mentors out there that just want to engage in the research process without actually having any production out of that process. And while that's a great philosophy to have, if you're not actually producing something that you can put on your residency application, then you're ultimately putting yourself behind the 8 ball in terms of applicants who do have the production that they're able to put on their application. And the last thing I'll say is craft a narrative. Do research that you're interested in that you can really speak to during your residency application, because if a program director starts asking you about your research and they can't see a narrative behind why you're pursuing the research that you're pursuing, they're going to say, hey, this guy is just getting research done because he wants to look competitive. But if they don't truly think that you're going to come there and do research and make them look better, and that you're only doing it during medical school so that you look good, then they're going to see right through that, and they're not going to view you as highly as someone who really does have that narrative that stands out and makes them a really believable candidate. So if you're watching all of this and you're a second or third year medical student and you're starting to worry that you really don't have enough research to be competitive for some of these surgical subspecialties or something like dermatology, then all hope is not lost. There's something called the research year, which is typically completed between the 3rd and 4th years of your medical school, where you take the entire year off and you typically go to another institution that has a very large research department in the specialty you're interested in, and you just work for them doing research the whole year. It's something that I think can really increase your competitiveness in these highly competitive fields. But there are significant costs associated with this year that I think you should also keep in mind. One is that a lot of these positions are not paid. So somehow you have to figure out how to fund yourself through this experience. And typically loans are not eligible to cover your research year. So you'll have to find outside funding if you can't find a paid position. The other aspect to think about is there is significant cost. You are leaving your medical school class and all your friends end up graduating a year earlier than you. So it's a bit isolating socially to get pushed out of your class to pursue this year. I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to do this, but we have quite a few people in our class pursuing this route, and it is a bit sad to see them get left behind by a year. The other cost you need to think about is you are delaying income, and ultimately you're giving up 1 year of an attending's salary. That is something that you should not bat your eyes at. That's something that you could potentially be losing out on $500,000 to $1 million. So keep that in mind when you're factoring whether or not you should do this research year. But I will say there's significant value in doing this research here that goes beyond publications. Typically, you're working with the leaders of the field in your specialty and you're producing research for them. You are able to develop a amazing bond with these mentors that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't do this year or if you didn't get the chance to go to this institution. So that leads to typically great letters of recommendation that can really make you stand out on your residency application. But there is a bit of a catch here that many program directors have stated that their expectations for your research productivity on your CV tend to be higher if they know that you did that research year. And typically they can tell on your application if you took that year off to do research. So if you end up applying for a research year, doing it, and you don't have as much research as someone who went through all 4 years, they will hold that against you because they're going to question how productive are you really if you could take an entire year off and you still couldn't produce a lot of research. So if you made it to the end of this video, you might be wondering, how do I get started? And my first recommendation is just start small. Don't try to jump into a giant clinical trial and lead an effort to cure cancer. That's not something that's realistic for a medical student. But when I first started, I wrote a simple letter to the editor in response to a publication in the Journal of Urology, and I was pleasantly surprised when it was accepted. That gave me the confidence to pursue bigger papers, and eventually I worked my way up to original research articles. So start small, and eventually you'll realize that you're able to pursue these larger projects because you learn so much as you go along your way. The other thing is, don't underestimate the power of a cold email. I can't tell you how many opportunities I've had given to me by just reaching out to somebody and asking if they needed any help on a research project, or just telling them that I was interested in their field and would love to learn more from them. The worst thing that's going to happen is they're just going to ignore your email and you wasted 2 minutes crafting an email and sending it to them. But the best case scenario is you develop an amazing mentorship with someone that you otherwise wouldn't have known. The next is view the world through research opportunities. I know this sounds a little bit weird, but everything out there tends to have some sort of spin in terms of current events that you can shift into a research opportunity. We were able to get a publication off of the public interest in vitamin A as a treatment option for measles during the recent measles outbreaks. So once you start seeing the world through this lens, finding ideas to pursue becomes a lot easier. The other thing I'll say is read other people's research. Most of my ideas have come from inspiration, seeing what other people have done in their methodologies and how they study and tackle certain problems. I think it's very difficult to come up with ideas without knowing what your predecessors have done before you. And the last thing is just have faith. Have faith in yourself and have faith in this process. It can be incredibly daunting, and like we said earlier, it can take up to a year from a project's idea to getting published. And at times you're going to doubt yourself and think that you might not have a good idea or might not be able to do it or might not be up for the task. I would say push those bad thoughts out of your mind and just have faith that you can do this, because it is a very daunting task. But once you're able to get that first publication and prove to yourself that you can do this, then everything just becomes a matter of execution and discipline. But if you find yourself in need of additional help, don't worry. This is going to be the first of a series of free videos we upload to our YouTube channel. But also check us out at MedSchool Publishers. We're going to have a ton of free resources, but also offer a paid research mentorship service that guarantees publication. And let's be clear, this is not some sort of pay for publication service. This is a paid mentorship service where we feel confident that we can bring you the results that you need to get published. And how do we feel so confident? Because we've done it before with people just like you, countless of times. So feel free to reach out to our contact information below or check out our website in the video below. Thanks and good luck, guys.